Welcome back to the Eli Spitzer podcast. My guest today is the State of Israel's Ambassador to the United Kingdom, Her Excellency Ambassador Tzipi Hotovely. Ambassador Hotovely, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
I thought I'll start by asking you about the demographics of Jews in Israel. The most recent statistic that I've seen is that the haredi community, Charedim in Israel, now make up, I think, about 12 or 13% of the population in Israel. And they are the fastest growing section of Israeli society. And even though I should add that the birth rate in Israel is still quite healthy compared to Jewish communities outside of Israel, but it's still the case that the Haredi birth rate and the growth of the Haredi community is the highest in Israel, which of course means that Charedim become a growing section of the population, and the lifestyle of Charedim has a growing impact on the state in general. To what extent are you concerned about the lack of participation in the army, and also what is perceived as the lack of participation in the Israeli economy, with so many Haredi men who choose to spend their life learning and studying in yeshiva instead of actually participating in the workforce? Do you think that this is a problem that needs to be solved in Israel? And if yes, what solutions do you have?
Well, let's start with the way I see growing Israeli community in Israel is a great thing. We have more Jews. After the Holocaust, I think many people couldn't believe that Israel will become the way it is today. And I'm so happy about the fact that we have growing communities. So it's something to be happy about. It's not something to be concerned about, if you ask me. Israel should grow and be stronger, and this is the next generation, and it's wonderful. When it comes to the Haredi community in Israel, as you said about the Haredi community here, it's full of nuance. I spent my 11 years in Israeli politics, as you know, as the representative of over 1 million people, being part of the central leading right-wing party of Israel. And I became now a diplomat. So I have a little bit of perspective about Haredi groups because it was part of the Israeli coalition, the coalition in the government that I was part of. And the truth is, there are so many interesting trends today among ultra-Orthodox people, Haredi people in Israel, like women go to college. And you see more people are interested to have a profession that is based on academic knowledge. And you see some people, I'm not saying that this is a big trend, but you see some people that want to serve Israeli army, especially on technological fields. So you can see change and trends that are leading the Haredi people to want to integrate in Israeli society. So I'm not saying everyone, but I do think that those trends are really, really positive. And just in general, I think that you can't impose anything on anyone. I'm a real believer that we are a free country, and as a democratic country, we should give those groups to have their, their trends to be part of the state of Israel as they're interested to be. So I think we need to have patience on those issues, and the trends are very, very positive, in my opinion, about the Haredi groups, especially women. I think the role of women here is crucial, because every time you see women move forward to the front of the stage, it shows about a big change that will happen in the society. You know, we always say that b'zchut nashim tzadkaniyot nig'alu. It means that every time there is a big change in history, you see the women in the front. So I really think that it's the same with the Haredi group, as much as I see as the feminist revolution as part of a big thing in history of humankind, as something that moves history forward.
Right. But the question is, isn't it, sometimes it's easy to rely on women to just pick up the burden. It's very nice to see what the phenomenal job that women who are full-time mothers and at the same time pursue careers and actually are the main breadwinners at home. But is this really sustainable, to have a community where we rely on women to be the ones contributing to the economy, but 50%, I think, of Haredi men at the moment, which is significantly lower than what it used to be, are currently not contributing and not involved in the workforce. And again, it's easy to say that free choice and people are entitled to do what they want. But at some point, I think Israeli governments have a responsibility to think strategically. And they have to think further down the line. Surely in the 1950s, when Ben-Gurion made a concession about joining the army, there were a group of, I think, 500 or 600 yeshiva students. And I think the consensus is that Ben Gurion didn't think that 50 years, 60 years later, Charedim will still, or Adukim, as he referred to them at the time, will still continue to grow and be such a large section of society. Is there a need to recalibrate anything at a policy level? Do you think that there's anything that the Israeli government has to do differently? One example, the issue of joining the army is a very thorny issue and a very complicated issue, but it is also unintentionally a major obstacle for Charedim to join the workforce. Because, of course, the only reason to be exempt from serving in the army is if you study full time. Whereas if there'd be an exemption which is not linked to Torah study, maybe that would make it easier for Charedim to join the workforce.
I think that, again, you need to understand what I'm saying. I'm a modern Orthodox woman that all my brothers served in Israeli army, and two of them are still in the Israeli army. One is a high officer. So you can't find me saying that serving Israeli army is not an important thing. I'm just speaking about what's the way to have more integration of the Haredi people in Israel in all the things you mentioned, the working market. And I think you need to be patient and to see the process that is happening within the community as something that is very, very positive. And this is why I really believe that you can't have for a long while just one person in the family that brings, as you said, the bread to the house. Because in Israel, most families need to have two partners working. So I think that for sure we will see in the coming future more people want to also, leveling their life standard. You don't want to raise your family in poor standards. So you can see more people are interested of changing that. And I think we should invest in those programs. I know here you have Kemach as a program that is encouraging people to give them all what they need in order to be part of a working society. And I believe that if we'll have more programs like Mechinot, even like Mechina is something very important that is like a preparation to university. So I think those are the things we need to do. We need to do it in a positive way and with integration, not imposing. Because if you impose, you have backlash, and then nothing good will come out of it.
Yes. The Haredi community, sometimes people misunderstand the Haredi community, both in Israel and outside, where they think that Haredim are anti-Israel or anti-Zionist. Now, it's true that there are some small sections in the Haredi community that are very opposed to Zionism and feel very strongly against Zionism, but I would argue that the majority of Haredim are actually very supportive of the state of Israel, but would identify themselves as non-Zionist. They do not buy into Zionist ideology. I think if you look historically, if you go back to the turn of the century, the 1920s, 30s, I think Zionism was very much a secular movement that was in competition with the old traditional Judaism. Of course, later on, religious Zionism emerged, and that was going to be the answer to secular Zionism. But as far as Charedim are concerned, the majority of Charedim don't identify with Zionism at all. But that doesn't mean that they are opposed to the state of Israel. In fact, I believe that Charedim are very much supportive of the state of Israel, and I think in an age where you find more and more of mainstream Jews, especially in the United States, that are turning away from Israel, I think Charedim can be relied upon, and Orthodoxy in general, to actually be very supportive of Israel. The question is, the fact that they don't identify with Zionist culture, or with they won't celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, or they won't wear a Magen David, or they won't, the iconography of Israel doesn't resonate with them. How much do you think, is that a cause of division among the Jewish people? Is that something that we need to address, or is that okay? As long as you don't work against the interests of the state of Israel, and you are supportive of its goals, its defense objectives, and its economic objectives, then maybe it's not a big concern. What do you think?
I have a long answer for this, and you need to be patient, because I think some of the things historically, the assumptions are not correct, and I would like to correct. First of all, historically, Zionism. If you think about Jews as a movement coming back to the state of Israel, we need to start with Aliyat Talmidei Agra, which was purely religious Aliyah to Israel. Then you have the Biluim and Chovevet Zion. It was all initiatives of religious people coming back to their homeland. So Zionism had a major factor of our historic connection to the state of Israel. You cannot deny that. I believe every Jew is Zionist because every Jew believes that the state of Israel and the land of Israel is where Jews are connected historically. And this is why I don't really understand why to deal with the division when we actually can think about the positive side of being supportive of the state of Israel. So this is the first thing. The second thing is another thing that comes to the historic Haredi groups in Israel. I have many Haredi people that are my friends. Some of them are great rabbis. And it's very famous that historically, many of those Haredi people in the beginning of the state of Israel were very, very proud to hang Israeli flags and to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut. Some of them even said Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut. So again, it's not like one track to go. The track is much more complicated, but let's deal with the positive side. You're saying the big group of the ultra-Orthodox people here are pro-Israel. I think that me as an ambassador, I always say to people, even on the different groups that I meet here, and I try to outreach all the groups in the Jewry of Britain. I'm not a rabbi. I came here as the Israeli ambassador. I think every Jew should be connected to the state of Israel because this is the biggest miracle the Jewish history has experienced, and we need to cherish and be grateful on this miracle. And I think every Jew all around the world should be proud of this miracle. And I want this connection, and this is why I'm coming to speak to you. And I think that just getting into the things that divide us is not going to do any good. We need to speak about the things that unite us, and people need to be proactive and be vocal about supporting Israel. And we have so many challenges, so let's deal with them together.
Right, and it's great to hear such a positive attitude to that. But if you look at Israeli politics at the moment, especially the very heated election campaigns over the last couple of years, in the Haredi world, in the Haredi press, in the Haredi media, there's a lot of discussion about hasata, incitement against Charedim. Some politicians in Israel stand out or are being accused as being the most extreme when it comes to turning hostility towards Charedim as a political weapon. Others are sort of less openly anti-Haredi, but the Haredi community, I think, in Israel feels very strongly that from the left of Israeli politics, or maybe even not exclusively from the left, from the center as well, there's a lot of incitement against Charedim. Do you think that there's truth to that, or do you think Charedim are just crying wolf, and actually it isn't a major concern?
There is a truth to that. I can see incitement, but unfortunately we are in an era where there is big hate speech around, especially in social media. So I would say there is incitement against Haredi people, but unfortunately, it's just the levels of hate speech that is growing all around us. So you can see many people are feeling not comfortable today with the way the discourse is being handled. I can tell you that living Israeli politics, that for me was a very, very significant part of my life. Part of the fact I enjoy being ambassador is the fact I can enjoy being less divided person and more speaking about unity and looking for the common things we have as a nation and as people. And I love that. I think that this is for me an opportunity to look outside of things with perspective and to say, wait a second, the challenges we all face are so much bigger than what makes us different. And I think it's good for me as an ambassador to deliver this positive discourse because, again, it's very, very harmful. And it's a problem that you see this hate speech all around us. Personally, I feel very bad about the way discourse in general has become so poisoned. And I think we need to go back and to remember that we are one people and we have so many things, so many good things to do for the humankind, not just for the Jewish people. This is our role. I always quote Avraham Avinu was giving this blessing, "V'nivrechu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama." You need to bless all humanity. We're not
Right.
just a national state for ourselves. And you can see Israel is doing amazing things about bringing its blessing to the entire world.
Right.
We've seen that with the vaccination, by the way.
But I think I'm a member of the Haredi community, and I speak to a lot of my friends and family members of the Haredi community who find, when they read the mainstream press in the UK especially, you'll find an article in the Jewish Chronicle about a councillor in Bradford who posted something on social media which shows a map of Israel with a Palestinian flag on it, and that's a major outcry, and he is supposed to lose his job, and he needs to resign, and so on. And at the same time, they would listen. There would be a clip on WhatsApp going around with an Israeli politician saying that we need to take all of the Charedim, put them on a wheelbarrow, and take them to landfill and dispose of them. Or you will see someone who would say that the Charedim in Israel are a bigger threat than Hamas are to Israel. And I think there's a feeling in the Haredi community that this whole industry of standing up to anti-Semitism, which is so strong and so powerful and all across both in Israel and outside of Israel, for some reason when it comes to Charedim, that simply doesn't apply to them. And I can tell you that people feel really resentful about it. And there doesn't seem to be a concern about specific language used against Charedim, whipping up proper hatred against Charedim, and that somehow is tolerated. Do you think that it is tolerated more than it is against other groups?
I don't think it's tolerated. I don't think it should be tolerated. And I think that, again, when you have politicians speaking, they enjoy immunity. The fact that they're part of the parliament, they can just whatever they want. Believe me, I heard some really, really rough things through 11 years I was sitting in the Knesset. So it's not just against Charedim, it's all over. But I can tell you that when it comes to the way media presents Charedim and the way the public speaking about it is becoming something that, as you said, can be a little bit of anti-Semite or a real hate speech. It should be regarded as such and as a crime. So I think brutality in speech is something that we need to be concerned about because you can see it also on the streets, and it's not a good thing, and we need to handle it. And again, as I said, it's part of radicalization in general in the way people speak about different groups. So you're looking at it from the Haredi perspective. I look at it also from trying to create this, I call it artificial division, because we have so much more in common than, I'm not saying it just as a diplomat, also as a politician. Right. I would have felt there's so many good things. I used to have friends from the left wing, and we used to do good things together. We can really get together for a good cause, no matter if we're divided on different issues. So I'm just saying we need to work. I really think that our job is to concentrate on the good and on the common. And just, there's a very nice phrase I like to quote from the Rabbi Mikotsk. The Rabbi Mikotsk said that if you're dealing with lishbor et hayetzer, if you break your yetzer, you have two of them. Like you have one thing, was one, now you have two. So basically what Hasidut was most of the time saying to Jews, if you want to fight the evil, and the Rabbi Milubavitch was very good when he told Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN, you're in house of darkness, just light a candle. So bring more light. So the best way to fight things that are dark is to bring more light. And I think this is what we should do together.
Okay, there's one area, and this is, I feel a responsibility to mention this, and to maybe bring it to your attention, and maybe there's something you can do about it. I mentioned earlier that I believe that the majority of Charedim, despite not identifying with Zionism, feel very strongly in support of Israel. I mean, a typical example, if you ever pick up the English Hamodia newspaper in London, you would see that probably half of the newspaper is content about Israel. And that includes Israeli economy, defense, Israeli politics, not specifically Haredi issues. And I think Charedim very much, mainstream Charedim, identify closely with the state of Israel and support it. I have noticed a trend when there's a significant decline in support for the state of Israel. And that is whenever there are images and videos being circulated of police brutality against Charedim. And this has come up during COVID, it has come up, but also during protests and things like that, where you see quite horrific footage of Israeli police officers manhandling women, girls, children. It comes across as quite brutal. Obviously, it's very difficult by looking. Social media can be a very dangerous way of assessing a situation because sometimes things are exaggerated. But there seems to be a genuine concern, and I can tell you from my own experience and the experience of my friends that whenever that comes up, people suddenly feel very resentful. And someone very close to me has said to me recently that when he sees that, he always thought that he would love to make Aliyah at one point. But then when he sees those videos and he sees those pictures, he thinks, really? Am I going to be safer in Israel than I am in Belgium? The guy lives in Belgium. The question is, as ambassador, is this something that you would raise with the Israeli government? I think ambassadors usually do that if there's a concern with their Jewish communities wherever they are in the world, have a specific concern about Israel. And I know usually the concerns would be about settlements or two-state solutions and all of that. For Charedim, I don't think they care too much about those issues, but I think what they really do care about is when they see fellow Charedim being beaten up by Israeli police, and maybe this is something you can take up with the Israeli government.
Absolutely. I think that any police brutality is unacceptable and needs to be taken care of in the way those kind of things being taken care of, that those cops that are committing those crimes should be under investigation. And this is what Israel is doing whenever there is a violence coming from police. Other groups are saying that they feel sometimes the police being too brutal. So I definitely raised this thing with the Israeli government, absolutely. I don't think that we get to see too much of this. This is the truth. We also need to remember the daily life for Haredi people in Israel is heaven. For most of the people, they can practice Judaism the way they believe. I would say many people are asking me, how does it feel to be a Jew in the diaspora? And the truth is, it's much easier to be a Jew in Israel. The atmosphere all around you, the fact that it is a Jewish state. So I would say that still, for me as a Jew that really believe that Israel is the homeland of every Jew, it's the biggest blessing that Jews can learn Torah. We are the biggest Torah learning center in the Jewish world today. More than America, more than the UK, more than France, more than anywhere else in the world. More yeshivot, more spiritual leaders, big renaissance of Jewish studies, many people doing Daf Yomi, celebrating, finishing the Shas. I think all those great things are happening with the state of Israel. So we really need to celebrate those good things. I'm not ignoring brutality, as you mentioned in the beginning of your question. We need to fight that, and I'm willing to be your voice in front of the government of Israel. But we also need to remember all the positive things because the Haredi community is flourishing.
Yeah. I want to move on from Haredi specific issues, and I want to talk about the relationship between Israel and the Anglo-Jewish community in general, but more specifically about your personal relationship with Anglo-Jewry. Ever since the announcement was made that you will be joining, that you will be appointed the Israeli ambassador to the UK, I think it's fair to say that you have faced unprecedented opposition. And there were petitions organized against your appointment. There were calls for you to be boycotted from mainstream platforms and events. Were you surprised by this? And how has it affected you personally? And how has it affected your ability to do your job?
Actually, the opposite is the truth. When it came to reality on the ground, I was really, really welcomed. And just yesterday, I met the chief rabbi, and he said how much the Jewish community is thrilled and excited to have a woman, to have someone who's Orthodox. And many people are inviting us to now, especially that lockdown is over. I visited, I think, over 30 different communities, including communities outside of London, like Manchester and Leeds, and the community in Scotland and Birmingham. So I'm really outreaching the entire Jewish community of the UK, very proud of the fact I see myself also as a special envoy to the Jewish community here. And, you know, the minority people that speak, I can tell you that I got a good advice from my predecessor, Mark Regev. He said, now everyone is praising me, saying how wonderful ambassador I am. So I just want you to know in the beginning, they didn't want to see me. They were really against me because I was Netanyahu's man. So don't feel bad about it. It's just, they need to get to know you and everything will be good. And I think this is the reality. The reality is I'm welcomed. And again, I'm here to meet every Jew and every community. I'm here for you. I'm here for the bridge of the connection between Israel and the Jewish community here. And I'm very happy that me and my family are the representatives of Israel here.
I think Mark Regev, I don't know what sort of opposition and hostility he had to put up with, but I think there is an obvious difference between you and your recent predecessors, is the fact that you have a background in politics and you have spent a good number of years in senior positions in government, time as a minister. Do you think that that is perhaps something that undermines your ability to then be an effective diplomat?
I think
your
it's
background
a
in politics.
exactly the opposite.
Explain.
It's a big benefit. So being a minister in Israeli politics and a parliament member, I can understand. What's an ambassador? Ambassador basically needs to improve the bilateral relationship. And in order to do that, he needs to have a good relationship with the British government. So one of the things, it's easier for me as other ambassadors, everyone did a good job, but for me, affiliating with politicians in the British government is very easy because I feel very comfortable in this arena. And I just want to mention the achievements, the great achievements. Again, this is the achievement of the state of Israel. I don't want to take credit for myself. But because Israel was doing such a great job with vaccination, Israel has become one of the only places in the world that was a green country. And we've seen British seniors coming to the state of Israel. Just in the last 2 months, we had Michael Gove visiting Israel, working on a green corridor between our two countries. Then we had Foreign Secretary Rab coming to Israel to support us after the military operation we had in Gaza. He was invited by Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi. Now I just got back from Israel. Liz Truss, the Secretary of Trade, came to launch a new trade agreement. Think about it. It shows a lot about activity and the fact we're working in excellent way with the Israeli British government, do a great job together. So I find my skills as, I would say I'm the senior person that was sent to London ever from Israeli government. And this is something that shows how much Israeli government respects London. So I can see that only as a benefit, and I think it's great. I'm bringing those skills to my role here, and I have great relationship with many British politicians, and I find it like an easy place to play the diplomatic game. And diplomacy and politics have their differences, and I definitely know I'm a diplomat now, but I definitely use my skills, and I'm proud of the skills I reached in 11 years serving my people as politician.
Now, of course, something important has happened since you were appointed as ambassador, is that when you were appointed, the Prime Minister in Israel was Benjamin Netanyahu, and now the Prime Minister is Naftali Bennett, and perhaps more importantly, the Foreign Minister is Yair Lapid, who is, I think, effectively your boss at the moment, but also your former rival in the Knesset. Has that had any effect on your ability to do your job effectively? The fact that there's been a change of government and one that you don't necessarily, well, it's not your political party at all, and they're now in opposition.
Well, it's something that many people should know and understand about Israeli system with political appointees. In our history, many times when people were appointed as a political appointees, governments were changing. Historically, we had many times that we had an ambassador here was appointed by Arik Sharon, and then after a while, it was Ehud Barak becoming a prime minister. Nothing really impacts the fact that we are ambassadors, we're civil servants. I resigned from my political roles, and now I'm part of the foreign ministry. I do that with great love to my shlichut as being a diplomat here and serving here. And even more important, on ideological level, many people asking me if it's okay for me to represent this government. So I said, of course, because the foreign policy is not changing. Our big threats, the Iranian issue, bilateral trade issues, they're all the same. So for me, part of the fact that I was taking this role for 3 years in democratic countries, as you know, government change, and I knew that it's a possibility. And I know I have a legal contract that is binding me for 3 years representing my country. And I'm very happy to have doing this lichut. So we're not like the American system. When you have new government, you change your officials. In Israel, while you're becoming a civil servant, you stay like this. The only exclusive to this is Washington, and in Washington you never sign on 3-year contract. You have a personal appointee from the prime minister, and London and all the other places are different for this issue.
I see.
Benjamin Netanyahu was serving as a UN ambassador under Shimon Peres.
Right. Yep. Although Benjamin Netanyahu at the time wasn't Benjamin Netanyahu that we know today. He was starting out. It was the earlier days of his...
His ideology was very clear those days.
Right. Okay. You mentioned a number of threats to Israel, existential threats, perhaps, the Iranian threat and various other threats. What about a more internal threat? Now, it has long been acceptable that Jewish groups, even more left-leaning Jewish groups, can voice opposition to Israeli government policy, and I think that has always been acceptable. But I have personally felt that there's a growing trend of more extreme left Jewish movements who are perhaps aligning themselves with people who question the right of Israel to exist, go a lot further, what I would consider to be beyond the pale, a lot further of legitimate criticism of the Israeli government. Even though I personally believe that sometimes what is being dressed up as legitimate criticism is actually also goes further than that. Do you share my assessment that this is actually a threat to the state of Israel? And if yes, is there a strategy to deal with this threat? The internal Jewish threat to questioning Israel's legitimacy, questioning its right to exist, and even supporting the BDS movement or supporting far left organizations that really threaten and harm Israel's interests?
I think the fact that some people doubt the right of Israel to exist, no matter whether they're Jews or not Jews or non-Jews, this is a serious issue. I think, again, we need to fight that, and we need to make sure that this will be totally named the way it should be named. This is pure anti-Semitism, because no one is asking whether China has the right to exist, whether New Zealand has the right to exist, whether Australia has the right to exist. There's only one country in the world that people are doubting its right to exist, and this is the Jewish state. And I think we should address it the way it should be. This is why we're so proud of the British government when they adopted the IRA definition that says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. So we need to make this linkage. I think this is part of my challenges here as an ambassador, to fight this discourse. I mean, I don't care who's saying that, Jews, non-Jews. I think that it's time for us to deliver this narrative that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism in the very, very ancient, bad way.
Let me move on. I want to ask you about Britain's attitude to Israel, and specifically the British government. My impression is that the British foreign policy towards Israel is very much formulaic. It's very, on the one hand, you've got Israel has a right to defend itself, but always goes together with we're calling for calm on both sides, and we have to implement a two-state solution. And it's very difficult, really, for me to figure out really exactly what Britain's attitude to Israel really is. So how would you characterize the attitude of the United Kingdom towards Israel?
I think that Britain is a friend, and I think friends can disagree about certain things. We sometimes have disagreements even with our best friend, America. So we need to remember that diplomacy and connection between countries, even in a family, you can have disagreements about things. So Kal v'chomer, and of course, when we speak about relationship between countries. So basically, we see Britain as a close friend. Now, one of the things maybe the people that are listening to us are not aware of, but I was hosting a very, very, I would say, high level and high representative security intelligence delegations in the last few months. One of the things is undercover, but everyone that knows Israel-Britain alliance understands. Britain is our second intimate ally when it comes to security and defense. And those are kind of things that maybe doesn't reflect on a daily life and don't get to see it in the newspaper all the time. But we share intelligence with the Brits almost as high as we share with the Americans. And there is triangle of cooperation on very, very important issues to our national security and to the British national security when it comes to security and intelligence. And we're very proud of this intimate relationship we have about this issue. This is why I would say Britain is an ally and a very important one. Second, Britain is our third trade partner. Think about it. It's United States, China, and United Kingdom. So it's really big also on economic level. And we have a very supportive attitude about many things that Israel is doing. I had a very good 4 months in the beginning where Israel here was vaccination nation, and all the newspapers were really flattering to the vaccination rollout of Israel. And the Israeli government was doing a brilliant job with that. And we were sharing practices about medical issues for the first 6 months. We still do that. And it was a wonderful cooperation until today. It was an opportunity to open a whole discourse with NHS. And today, Israeli companies are cooperating with NHS on a digital health and on many other issues. Also, science cooperation is great. So I think those are the things, I mean, as a diplomat, I can share with you all the fields of cooperation. So I think it's very positive and it's in a good momentum and we can do great things together. I'm expecting us to have a new trade agreement that will have more technological ingredients in the coming future. And as I said, security cooperation is excellent.
And I get that, and it's good to hear that in so many different areas, from security to trade and medicine, that there's very close cooperation. But I do get the feeling that, I mean, if you look at Britain's record of voting on UN resolutions, anti-Israel resolutions, there are a lot of abstentions. There was an impression for many years that Britain has aligned its attitude to Israel, that it was closely aligned with the EU's policy towards Israel. In recent years, we have seen the Visegrad group, often referred to as the V4, which includes the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, who have departed from the official EU line on Israel, and they've taken a more openly pro-Israel attitude. I mean, in the recent conflict in Gaza, we had some of those countries displaying the Israeli flag on their national buildings, a more overt and open embrace of Israel, if you like. Britain has now left the European Union. They've got even less reason to be aligned with the EU's or mainland Europe's attitude to Israel. Would you like to see more public support for Israel by the British government?
First of all, I think there is a public support. Again, I check it when I have my national issues. When Israel was under attack with the ICC, with the International Court, and were trying to say that Israeli soldiers were committing war crimes, it was Boris Johnson that wrote a very, very serious letter about the fact he doesn't accept this decision of the ICC. So we didn't see that with other leaders of state and heads of state. We've seen a very good, I would say, voting on the Human Rights Council. So we do see process that is positive. I think Brexit is an opportunity. Again, the British people choose Brexit. It's not my position to say whether I'm for or against. But while it was done during the time I'm here, it's an opportunity to build a relationship with Britain even closer. And I'm optimistic and I'm very positive about the momentum that our bilateral relations are in.
Now, last week, I think you presented your credentials to Her Majesty the Queen.
Yes.
Albeit virtually. I think your official title, if I'm not wrong, is Ambassador to the Court of St. James. And you presented your credentials from Buckingham Palace, although the Queen was in a different palace or in a castle in Windsor. But this is something that has bothered me for a long time. Her Majesty the Queen has been to hundreds of different countries and territories over her long reign, but she has never visited the State of Israel. And in fact, up until 2018, no member of the British royal family has visited Israel in an official capacity. There were visits made for funerals and personal visits. Do you think that's fair? And I don't think that this is a decision made by the royal family. I see that as a specific policy by the British Foreign Office over many years, who are mainly in charge of how to deploy the royal family on which engagements. And I think there's only one Jewish state, and over her long reign, at no point did she visit the only Jewish state. I think that's... I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, again, I'm going to disappoint you with being too positive, but this is my job as an ambassador. We had 2 official visits of the royal family. Just in the last 3 years, we had Prince Charles visiting the very, very important ceremony in Yad Vashem. We had Prince William visiting the Duke. We had a royal visit, official royal visit. And actually, I mentioned it to the Queen, and I said we would love to see more royal visits. And she said how much both Charles and Prince Charles and Prince William enjoyed very much of visiting the State of Israel. So all I can say is, even if historically the Queen didn't visit, there are still many royals to set up invitations and to expect them to come and visit. It's really my job to be open to everyone that wants to visit us, and to say how much we're happy with royal visits in Israel. I know it was a very exciting event when Prince William came. It was very respectful when Prince Charles came to address the very important ceremony in Yad Vashem. So
Yeah.
all I can say is expecting to royal visits, and it's great.
Okay.
The experience, by the way,
question.
with the Queen was excellent. She gave us almost 20 minutes, I think, of her time. And it was really positive, and we enjoyed it very much, even though it was virtual. And of course, they gave us the whole ceremony with the carriage and the opportunity to enjoy Buckingham Palace. And it was a great experience. And it was a moment to remember.
I'm sure it was. A final question about your experience with the British media, specifically, but more in general about the Israeli model of Hasbara, which has for many decades been seen as, sometimes it was referred to as public diplomacy. It was in various different ways. But I want to start by, first of all, asking you, what was your experience dealing with the media during the last conflict in Gaza? I mean, there was one particular interview with Adam Bolton from Sky News that I felt he was quite condescending and patronizing, but I think that I've become used to it. That seemed quite typical from mainstream British journalists when they interview Israeli ambassadors. But maybe you tell us, what was your experience with the British media?
British media is known and famous for being a critical media. I think they're critical to British politicians, as well as they're critical in general, because they think that this is their role as journalism, and I can respect that. I came from the media, so I wasn't surprised to see what I saw. So my job here is to bring the Israeli story to the British people. So I see that as a platform to speak to the British people and to bring again the Israeli story. And the Israeli story is really simple to deliver. We are a democratic country that wants to protect its women, men, and children who are under a fire of thousands of rockets being fired from a terror organization that's using his children as human shields. And I've been delivering this message over and over. I think I visited all the important talk shows in Britain, starting from Good Morning Britain and ending up in Newsnight. So this is my role, to bring the Israeli story. And I would like to use this platform of your important podcast to say, as individuals, I mean, I know that as ambassador, I can have media platforms, but today the benefit of today is the fact you have podcasts, you have different ways to express your opinions. You're not just being trapped in official media, and many people can speak up for Israel when Israel is having a military operation. You're saying people are pro-Israel in the Haredi community. So I would love to say that for us, it's an opportunity to have more ambassadors in the Haredi community that will speak up for Israel, will bring their personal experience. I'm sure many people in the Haredi community have family and relatives in Israel. So sometimes it's the personal story that speaks. I was going to television and was saying my mother was in a shelter and she's over 60. And I was giving this image because it was true. And when I was a young mother, I remember there was Protective Edge military operation. And I was just having my first daughter, Mayan, and I had to take her to a shelter. And when I used to tell that to the media, it makes it very human. And you can understand people cannot live this way of being attacked day after day, being under fire. And any other state would have done the same. And just to bring this emotion and this feeling when many people are speaking up, I think it's important. So I know that this is my job. I get paid for representing my country, but we need your help. We need the community help in speaking up for Israel.
Ambassador, I want to just thank you so much for your time. I know we're out of time. I want to wish you best of luck in the very important work that you do. And maybe one day, maybe before you leave, we'll have you back on again. Thank you very much.